Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Mary. And most of all, thank you very much, everyone, for being here, because it truly is, as Mary said, a team effort of everyone in this room who has been part of bringing Climate Cares to where we are today, where we're changing from a program into a centre. So why are we all here? Well, we heard in the Mentee, or we read in the Mentee, some of the reasons why you've chosen to be here and why this topic is important to you. But I wanted to just note and re-emphasize that we're here on behalf of the people experiencing the mental health impacts of the climate crisis around the world. Why are we here? We know that sadly, farmers are dying by suicide as another crop fails and they can't provide for their families. We know that young people are feeling stress and despair as they watch their future become more hopeless and be put in peril by the adults who are meant to be keeping them safe. We know that there are growing numbers of people experiencing climate-related disasters around the world, and that increasingly they cannot heal before the next onslaught hits. And this compounding trauma can increase the risk that they develop things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. In fact, experiencing any form of disaster can lead to 40 times the number of people affected psychologically than physically. But until recently, these have been hidden costs where there's growing compounding risks on the most vulnerable, including those with mental health conditions, who we know from recent and ongoing research are up to 3 times more likely to die, for instance, in a heat wave. And sadly, this means we're caught a bit in a vicious cycle where the climate crisis and burning fossil fuels is compounding the risks and worsening mental health of people around the world. And many of these people are the ones who need to be adapting and protecting their communities from the changing climate. For instance, when I was recently in Kenya, we heard from an amazing farmer turned clinical psychologist who changed careers in response to the mental health impacts she was seeing in her communities. 35% of farmers in her research in these communities are experiencing mental health conditions, often vastly compounded by the climate crisis. And what she said to us is it's great that we have this focus on climate adaptation, drought-resistant crops, but how can the farmers plant them if they can't get out of bed in the morning because they have depression? And this cost is in people's lives and their well-being, but it's also in the resources of the communities. It's been recently estimated that the extra mental health burden of climate hazards will cost 47 billion USD by 2030, but that this is escalating to 500 billion by 2050. And this is the thing, is that the climate crisis isn't linear. This is a compounding, escalating emergency. But the reasons that this is happening is often because there's interdependencies. And if we can recognize these interdependencies, then what we can see is the opportunity that's at the heart of the climate crisis. And that is to change this vicious cycle into a virtuous one, and to look at these common causes to what's plaguing our mental health and our climate, and actually act to make the conditions needed for good mental health and well-being. So there is the potential for a virtuous cycle if we can recognize that the state of our minds and the state of the world have these deep interdependencies. And there is huge alignment, as the recent IPCC reports showed, for the actions needed for a safer climate and those needed to create the societies and environments that support good mental health and well-being. But enabling this climate action depends on building our psychological resilience and understanding our psychological responses to the crisis and our capacities to cope and act. But building this resilience and climate agency can be a virtuous cycle. So what does this look like? At a systems level, obviously what is fundamentally needed is that we stop burning fossil fuels. But also communities need to be supported to adapt to the changing climate. And to take climate action, to create societies with active transport, green spaces, more energy efficient housing, strong communal bonds, these are things we know have big mental health co-benefits. We know that we need to involve people in climate action and in the decisions affecting their futures. And the IPCC reports show that societies with participatory governance, when we're enabling people to be part of the solutions, also are the societies where there's lower emissions and higher mental health and well-being. So this is what we're here to support, to recognise and act on these virtuous cycles where we can foster and sustain work that's aligned for a better climate for our minds. So that's why we're here, but how have we got to this point? So 4 years ago, I was working in youth mental health with actually Mark's here in the audience from Mental Health Innovations, and working a lot with youth mental health, working with my charity It Gets Brighter. And I'd come from a background of doing a PhD in neuroscience and looking at decision-making under uncertainty and the links with anxiety. And I was really struck that we were discussing youth mental health without necessarily considering the environment that youth were growing up in. And what does it do to young people to see those threats and uncertainties to their future? And I was experiencing this myself. My homelands of Australia, I was seeing changing before my eyes, waking up to bushfire smoke in my family's home, seeing the changes to the environments I cared so much about. And that ongoing stress, at particularly the climate inaction of leaders, was really taking a toll on my own mental health. But I wondered if this was anecdotally what I could see happening around me, why was this not reflected in any research or any data? So I started looking at into the literature, and of course found that there are many deep interdependencies between climate change and mental health. And joining forces with Neil, who's in the audience from the Grantham Institute, with Pip from the Helix Centre for Design, with Rhiannon from the School of Public Health, and many others across Imperial, we were able to bring together a group that had the passion to say, actually, this is a challenge that we both need to raise awareness of, this evidence base that is clear but unacknowledged, and also to get the data about some of these challenges that we only have the stories but not the evidence to take to policymakers yet. So over the last 4 years, it's been a pleasure and really a journey of passion and goodwill from a growing community around the world who's joined forces with us to really understand deeply and respond to these challenges and opportunities. So you can just see, I won't read them all out, but just the wealth of partners who've come on this journey, for lack of a better term, with us. And we're incredibly grateful that representation from some of these organizations are in the room with us today. So what have we done in the last 4 years? So just to give you a little bit of a taster, one of the things that we did, first of all, was to try and understand what is the nature, prevalence, and severity of the mental health impacts on young people. Was this just a few stories, or is this a bigger problem? We started the Changing World study, one of the first to actually collect data on this. In the UK in 2020, we did the first study of young people and sought to understand how they were affected by both the climate and COVID crises. And we found many things, but even in the midst of a pandemic, in the UK, young people were more distressed by climate than COVID. Of those, 10% had really high distress. And for those young people, when asked how frequently they worried about a range of issues, climate was the one they worried about most frequently for their own future as UK residents. And this is at 2020 in the height of the pandemic, more than relationships, work, school, politics, COVID, anything else. And you can only imagine how that number might have grown, or how that number might be if you're a young person in the Philippines where the impacts you're feeling are so much greater. We've also collected data from 3,000 young people in the US, and again, found many different things, but among them that direct experience of climate-related events really heightens eco-anxiety at really high levels of distress that can be affecting daily life and function, and decision-making. So 1/3 of these young people who have had direct experiences are scared to have children, and 1/5 of those who haven't had experience. We've worked with our partners at the George Institute they've collected data from, with this same survey in Indian slums, and found, again, negative impacts of experiencing these events, but also, and again, coming back to the sort of hope and opportunity at the heart of this, that taking action, even on an individual level, can have positive life impacts and well-being, and we've seen that in our other data too. Sandeep, our wonderful, invaluable partner in the Caribbean, and his team have done work with us for changing worlds in the Caribbean. And again, there's many results to share, but he's saying that this program has given a voice to the voiceless and brought attention to those that are most affected. And for that, we're very grateful to continue to work with him. So again, we've published over 20 papers in the last 4 years, but just to give you a taster of the kinds of things we're trying to do. One is to make sure that there is more awareness of these interconnections that have been largely hidden. So we have done a narrative review summarizing the evidence. We have also done a systematic analysis, review and meta-analysis of the impacts of temperature and mental health, finding, for example, that there's higher suicide risk with abnormal heat, and with heat waves, people are more likely to go to hospital for mental health conditions, and there's worsened population mental health and well-being. I'm still struggling with the technology here. We've also been working with UK mental health professionals to see, okay, is this actually showing up in practice? And what we're seeing is there's increasing cases of people coming to use mental health services where their mental health is affected by climate awareness or climate concerns. We've also tried to understand, is this moving into conversations in Parliament? What's happening in policy? And what we've seen to date is that there isn't much, is the short takeaway, apart from really a focus around flooding. And we've seen the mental health impacts of people in the UK who are scared to sleep, for example, after experiencing floods. And you can only imagine this around the world. So how can we get this action? We've worked with experts around the world to develop recommendations for actions across sectors. And we've also worked with young people to say, what do they want? So some of the authors of this paper are in the audience with us, and you'll hear from them in the panel. And they worked with 24 young people around the world to hear how they're feeling, how their mental health is affected, but also what they want. I guess the key thing, of course, is we need action from leaders, but also they don't want their distress to go away. They just want mental health support to better cope and act and be heard. So this means we need to take this to climate policy and make sure there is action to mitigate this distress and safeguard mental health. So we've been advocating for that at COP. And this leads into what we've done a little bit more in policy. So in 2021, we launched the briefing paper with the Grantham Institute. It's been downloaded now over 10,000 times, used by the Environment Agency, and featured in international media like the New York Times, the BBC, the Guardian, etc., Al Jazeera. We were the first to host a mental health event in the Blue Zone at COP, taking this issue to the heart of climate policy. We're thrilled that we've been able to work with partners to do that at COP 27, and are thrilled even further that at COP 28, this issue with Climate Cares and with Welcome and others will be part of the main program, with ministers coming to hear about these impacts. We've also been taking this into mental health spaces. For instance, we're about to go to the National Institutes of Mental Health conference, and we've worked with COP Squared to build a roadmap for social and emotional resilience to integrate with climate adaptation. We've been at the Africa Climate Summit and the UN Secretary General Climate Ambition Summit as well. But we've gone further with our partners at Apolitical to have a world-first course to look at climate change and mental health together, and hopefully break these silos where decisions are made about climate or mental health separately. And we've worked with the Natural History Museum to make sure that teachers also integrate mental health into climate education, which we know is a big challenge for both teachers and students when they're learning about these really challenging topics. We heard from young people in our Changing World study how difficult these issues are, and so we worked with them across the UK to co-design a guided journal that helps them process their emotional responses, develop coping strategies, imagine the future they want to see, and build their agency to take action for it. But we've also done work to look at interventions around the world in a scoping review, and to work with scientists and young people to develop an online platform. We've been really fortunate that in the last year, we've been working with welcome, who are here as well, lots of our friends in the audience, on a project called Connecting Climate Minds to further really strengthen this coming together of the climate and mental health community and to have a shared vision moving forward. And many of the partners, again, some of them like our Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Centre colleagues are here today, but we've worked with many partners around the world. What we're trying to do is build communities of practice regionally and also globally in all 7 SDG regions and create together through dialogue an actionable, inclusive agenda for research and action going forward and showcase all of this work on a global online hub. We're also working with Indigenous colleagues and communities around the world, young people and smallholder farmers. So after all of this work for the last 4 years, why are we launching a centre? Well, we still see big and growing needs, and one of the big challenges we see is disconnection, whether that's across disciplines, across climate, across mental health, across silos of policy, of research, across the global north and the global south. And what we really want to do is come together with a centre that fosters connection. So this centre represents connection between the climate and the health communities with the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment and the Institute for Global Health Innovation. But we really want to make sure that we take an integrated approach to all that we do. So we're bringing together research, intervention design, policy, and education. I just want to give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of work that we would love you all to join into the future, based on some of the key challenge areas that we see. The first, of course, as I just described, connecting climate minds, and we're really excited that these communities are being mobilised and brought together around the world, and that into 2024, we'll be able to advocate for and help implement the research and action agenda around the world to really make progress on climate change and mental health. We need to make sure, as I said, that policy is integrated, that climate is always considered in mental health policy and practice, and mental health is always considered in climate policy and practice. So we're taking this to the heart of those spaces. But in order to do this, we need a way to measure progress. We need appropriate metrics and indicators. And I can see our colleagues from the Lancet Countdown here who've been working on that amazingly across health for some time. And mental health is a real challenge area here. So we'd be thrilled to work with them, to work with colleagues like Sheikha Saxena and others to actually convene and work on developing that. We also know from the research we've done so far of the need to ensure that young people have their mental health safeguarded in the world that they're growing up in. But we also know that they have a lot of solutions. So we want to equip and work with young people so they can cope and take action sustainably. And this extends also into sustaining those who are taking action. We've been approached by the Met Office, by the BBC, by the Climate Change Committee, by the Dart Centre for Journalism, who are all coming to us and saying our mental health is being affected by the work that we do. This is really difficult work to sustain when you're aware of these issues, where you're trying to fight for them, and where you're being sometimes met by the challenges of inaction of the people you're trying to change their minds. So we're really keen to join forces with others and ensure that we can support people studying this work, studying in this space and taking action in this space. So we're working with people like AXA on a project with young people in Australia and the Philippines. We're working with the Anna Freud Centre and the Natural History Museum for whole school approaches to integrating climate change and mental health education. And we're working with these colleagues or hoping to continue to work with colleagues like the Met Office, like the BBC, to ensure that they have the resources to continue to work in climate careers. And we know every career needs to be a climate career moving forward. So with that, I just want to say, please join us. You know, we really haven't reached this point alone. The work has been fueled by collaborations internally across Imperial and externally. And it's only through that goodwill and that support that we've been able to do the work that we've done. And we really thank you for being here and really want to join forces moving forward to create a future that is better for our climate and our minds. I want to say a huge thanks. We have Lenore England in the audience, and a lot of this work has been supported by her generosity. And also, of course, Welcome, who are also here for all of their support for Connecting Climate Minds.